Ladies and gentlemen, dear viewers, my name is Danylo Lubkivsky, and I'm glad to welcome you on behalf of the Kyiv Security Forum. 2 days ago, the summit of the Group of Seven, the group of the world's largest economies and liberal democracies, committed to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. They stated this amid the horrific, abominable terrorist missile attack on the overcrowded shopping mall in Kremenchuk with many killed and wounded. The G7 leaders promised that Putin and those responsible for the attack would be held to account. Now the Western leaders meet in Madrid for another important gathering, Nato Summit. 2 years ago, French President Emmanuel Macron said NATO was experiencing brain death. But this is far from that. Today, NATO invited Sweden and Finland to join the military alliance. It recognized Russia as the most significant and direct threat to the allies' security. The member states decided to increase to more than 300,000 from 40,000 the number of troops on high readiness. They agreed on NATO's first new strategic concept in a decade. NATO agreed on a longer-term support package for Ukraine. As Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said, we are sending a strong message to Putin. You will not win. NATO stands up to the challenges. NATO members increase military spending. NATO enlarges. This year, the summit is attended by the leaders from not NATO members, South Korea and Japan, along with Finland and Sweden. President Zelensky of Ukraine has already addressed the summit. What does this NATO summit mean? Is the alliance preparing for a direct clash with Russia? What are its further steps to support Ukraine? What is the new NATO strategic concept and what global risks, along with Russia, does the alliance foresee? What in practice will now mean the assurances that the doors of the alliance remain open to Ukraine? We will discuss these questions and issues with our distinguished guests. First of all, we will feature today a special address by Mircea Geoană, NATO Deputy Secretary General. He recorded it especially for our event on the summit's eve. With pleasure, I introduce our speakers. Ambassador Christoph Heusgen, Chairman of the Munich Security Conference, and I thank you, Christoph, for being with us tonight. Ambassador John Herbst, Director of the Atlantic Council Eurasia Center and former United States Ambassador to Ukraine. Thank you, John, for being with us. Judy Dempsey, Senior Fellow at Carnegie Europe and Editor-in-Chief of the Strategic Europe blog. Thank you, Judy, for accepting our invitation. And Melinda Haring, Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. And I'm also happy to introduce Arseniy Yatsenyuk, former Prime Minister of Ukraine and the Chairman of the Kyiv Security Forum. Let us start with the special address to Ukraine and the Kyiv Security Forum by Mr. Mircea Geoană, NATO Deputy Secretary General.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and dear friends. It is my honor to address you today alongside many distinguished other speakers. Arseniy, Danylo, thank you for the opportunity. And congratulations for organizing the Kyiv Security Forum once again this year in such difficult times for your country. Discussions like the ones you have in this forum are of great importance. So I'm very glad I can take part in this. We are at the eve of an historic NATO summit in Madrid. It takes place at a pivotal Ukraine moment. Has brought bloodshed. Russia's brutal war of aggression against Ukraine has brought bloodshed to your people. It has shattered peace in Europe, and it is fueling food and energy crises worldwide. All NATO allies continue to condemn this war, and we call on President Putin to stop invading and occupying Ukraine. Russia must withdraw all its military forces and equipment and cease imposing its rule on a free and independent nation. All NATO allies also continue to stand in solidarity with the Ukrainians who are fighting so bravely for their homeland and for our shared values. Our support to your country's sovereignty and territorial integrity is unwavering. An independent, democratic, and stable Ukraine is key for Euro-Atlantic security as a whole. And that is at a time of a critical junction. We are committed to step up our assistance to help Ukrainians defend their rights, their freedom, and their sovereignty. With our support, Ukraine can prevail. It must prevail. In Madrid, we will take important decisions for our future security, including on our continued support to Ukraine. I am very pleased that President Zelensky will address our summit. Several allies have committed bilaterally to provide further equipment, including much-needed heavy weapons. In addition, I expect NATO leaders in Madrid to endorse a strengthened, comprehensive assistance package for Ukraine. It is composed of concrete projects to assist in the short term, including with anti-drone equipment, secure communications, and fuel. But more importantly, we also look at the longer term. For example, we'll help Ukraine transition from Soviet-era military equipment to modern NATO equipment to boost interoperability. And we'll further strengthen Ukraine's resilience as well as its defenses in capabilities, in security institutions across the board. All of this builds on the significant NATO and NATO allies since 2014 trained tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers and provided billions of dollars of weapons and other types of assistance to help the country uphold its right to self-defense enshrined in the UN Charter. Finally, a few words on the next strategic concept, which leaders will agree in Madrid. This document will reflect our radically changed security environment, and it will guide NATO in a more turbulent world. It will address many challenges that are hardly mentioned in the current strategic concept from 2010. Climate change, cyber, hybrid, and space, to name a few. For the first time, it will also address China and the challenges it poses to our interests, our security, and our values. And importantly, I expect the new document to refer to Russia as the most significant and direct threat to our security. I also expect the 2022 strategic concept to reaffirm the decisions we took back in 2008 at the Bucharest Summit, and all subsequent decisions with respect to Ukraine and also Georgia. Intimidation does not work. NATO's door remains open. Thank you so very much. I wish you a very good conference, and our prayers and our support go with the brave Ukrainian people.
We are extremely grateful to NATO Deputy Secretary General for his remarks and for those important decisions that were taken today in Madrid to support Ukraine and to strengthen the ability of the alliance to deter Russia's aggression and other threats that we all face today. I'm really happy that Ambassador Christoph Heusgen joined us directly from Madrid. Christoph, if I may, I would like to invite you to tell your impressions about what you saw today in Madrid. How do you assess the results of the summit? And do you think is NATO is preparing to a direct clash with Russia? I mean, how do you feel? How do you feel the atmosphere, and what do you think about the results? You're welcome.
Yes, thank you very much, Danylo. As you can hear from the background noise, I'm at the airport, and I hope you are able to understand me. I also have to run to catch a flight because I'm flying back to Munich. First of all, it's an honor and pleasure for me to participate in today's meeting. It's wonderful to see my friend Arseniy there. I'm really honored to be with you. Now, I'm no longer, as you know, in government service. I'm the head of the Munich Security Conference. We have been asked by NATO to have a kind of public forum, which we organized on the margins of the NATO Summit. And I'll tell you how I think how important this kind of PR work is. But first to tell you that in this public forum, we had today, we had many podiums. One of us was to have the mayor of Kyiv there, and also with his brother, who are very well known in Europe and beyond. And the Klitschko brothers really made a very impressive statement there. We also, I also in one of the forums I hosted today, the head of the presidential administration, Andrei Yermak, who told all about the activities from the president office. Now, what is my impression? I think I can echo what the Deputy Secretary General just said. That is, NATO is stronger than it has ever been. It's much more committed to its common cause. With the joining of Finland and Sweden sent a very strong message that countries that up to now had never the intention to join, or hardly ever the intent to join, now join, because they see that NATO, the umbrella of NATO protection is very important when we are faced with this aggressive adversary. And both countries will add to the security of NATO. Finland, for instance, it has 300,000 armed, trained forces. Sweden, a very good defense industry, and also in the strategic important region of the Baltic Sea now. Everybody around the Baltic Sea, with the exception of Russia, and everybody else is now, they're united in confronting Russia. So it was a strong message. The decision was taken, I think, at the time when the Deputy Secretary General issued his statement. He didn't know yet that there was a decision taken to now enlarge the number of rapid reaction forces in the NATO from 40 to 300,000. Many of them will be stationed directly on the front, on the eastern border towards Russia, and this is a strong signal. Impressive speech by President Zelensky to NATO. I think everybody was impressed by this. And you could see a very strong commitment by allies. Germany, among other countries, committed to send additional howitzers to Ukraine, and I think more has to come, because we are in for the long haul. I think that Russia so far is not ready to give up. They continue with their very bloody, very aggressive way of just destroying one city after the other. They believe that they are stronger. Everybody is very impressed by the heroic fight of Ukrainian soldiers, by the Ukrainian people, and the sentiment here was very clear. You have the support and you will win this. Now, let me come back to what I said before, what is very important, and that is, you know, we did this public event. We have to continue, and this is our task in Germany and others, we have to continue to rally support for you. We have to prevent over time a kind of Ukraine fatigue. There is a danger. I know this from my time at the UN, where on Ukraine resolutions, the numbers supporting over the last years were dropping. So we have to be united in continuing to present the cause, to tell very clearly who is the culprit and who is the victim. Because, and it was important that today in Kyiv, the president of Indonesia was received. There is a danger that Russian-Chinese narrative is winning in parts of the world, in Africa, South America, and parts of Asia. The argument, there are two arguments. First argument is a very naive one and saying, well, Russia says that they have all these deficits with regard to food because of the sanctions that are implemented by the West. So this is one which many people believe, and there we have to counter it, make it very clear that it is Russia that is blocking the possibility for Ukraine to export. Number two, and that is, many say, well, this is double standard. When the U.S. invaded Iraq, it was in violation of international law, and now Russia is doing the same thing. So why are you so tough now? Why you weren't that time? And we, the global South, we are the victims of these high prices. So kind of an equidistant view to it. I just tell you how I perceive it outside NATO countries, outside Europe, and this is something we have to fight together. I think we have to work with our partners in other continents to make it very clear, what is the history, what is happening, who is the culprit, and who blatantly violated international law. We have to see this, and I come back to and I tell you what we are trying to do with our Munich Security Conference. We will do a lot of local conferences now in Germany, telling also the normal people and not only the usual crowd, telling how important it is that we stand up to Russia, that we continue to send weapons, that yes, we have to pay a price for the freedom, for our freedom that is defended in Ukraine when we have higher energy prices, inflation, maybe a recession. This is a tall task, but I'm sure that we will win this. Russia counts on our weakness, and I'm very certain he will fail. I have to run, but I just wanted to send this message of solidarity. I saw last week President Poroshenko was in Berlin. We had a very nostalgic meeting, but I assured him that the Munich Security Conference, I personally will continue to support Ukraine, to support the cause and fight Russia. So with this, I want to leave you, Danylo. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I do appreciate, and thank you very much for your support and for your solidarity. We highly appreciate your contribution in those efforts to support Ukraine. We do appreciate.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christoph. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Arseniy. Always
thank you.
wonderful
Thank
to
you.
see you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Have a nice life.
So I will invite Arseniy Yatsenyuk to make his remarks, to share with us what do you think about the results of the summit, and what do you think about what Christoph said about those challenges that they try to solve in Madrid today? You're welcome.
Oh, no doubt that that's a historic day today. And we are living actually in historic times. This war is far from over, very far from over. And we need to realize that Russia has a lot of ammunition, has a lot of manpower. Russia still has a lot of raw materials, financial resources. Look what's up at the global markets with the energy prices. They are soaring. And this is an additional, I would say, way how to finance the military machine of the Russian Federation. Ukraine is, for the time being, is outgunned and outnumbered. But we are not outgutted, I would say. Our guts, our will is so strong that we are fighting against one of the biggest armies in the world for practically more than 4 months. So that's on the one hand, that's unbelievable. On the other hand, that's the way how the real fight for freedom looks like. what is happening right now on the ground, I mean, in terms of geopolitics, Putin already achieved everything contrary to what he expected to get. All the opposite. So today's decision to enlarge NATO from 30 to practically to 32 members is completely the opposite Putin expected. He expected actually to undermine NATO. But I believe that the right decision will be not to have 32 members, but at least 33. The 33rd one is to be Ukraine. We were granted an open door status in 2008, and I was the co-signator of this application to NATO MAP to get membership action plan. The second, what happened, and Putin didn't expect this, and not only Putin, but all these bloody dictators. Ukraine has been granted an EU candidacy status. The third, look what's happening with the West. He expected completely fractured West. But as of now, we have an unbelievable, unprecedented unity. The fourth, talking about the NATO, the strengths of NATO, you are well aware of these notorious words of the former president of the United States when he said that NATO is obsolete. It's no longer obsolete. It's completely new one. I do understand that NATO decided to find an appropriate response to the challenges that the NATO and the free world is facing, when this is the right thing to do. But here is the thing. So one of the biggest, I would say, historic crazy missions that Putin believes he is to accomplish is to take over Ukraine. This is his ultimate goal. It is in the same line with how to undermine NATO, how to fraction the EU, how to fight against the US, how to form an alliances of dictators in the world. But his key goal and his historic crazy mission is to conquer Ukraine. And we need, in this particular historic moment, to prevail, to stop him, and actually to bring him to justice and dictators like him. So what is on the table right now? We, as the Ukrainian people, are fighting not just for democracy. We are fighting for our lives. We are fighting for the security and for the lives of the entire European continent and of the entire free world. What is needed? An unwavering support, real strong support, which we are getting right now in terms of strong supply of heavy weaponry, ammunition, in making Ukraine actually a NATO member, because we are on this road right now. We are paving the way to real membership, because Ukrainian military became so interoperable with the NATO standards right now. As NATO decided to send howitzers and another heavy weaponry to Ukraine. What Christoph said, he said about this another very bad narrative that we faced in the free world of so-called Ukrainian fatigue. And Putin is waiting for this. He's well aware how it works in every democratic state. Here is the thing. We, in the world of democracy, we do have elections. So we do have an opposition. We need to take into consideration different points of view. He doesn't have this kind of, in his opinion, problems. He is to appoint a new president or appoint a new prime minister or to appoint who is to be the members of the Russian Duma. So Ukrainian fatigue could be a disaster, not just for Ukraine, but for the entire free world. And Putin will definitely sell his fake narratives about who is the culprit, as Christoph said, and who is on the right side and who is on the wrong side. But we have, as of now, we have enough of tools to tell the truth, to pursue this truth, and to make everything possible to make Ukraine the country that prevailed. Because if people say Russia will never win, the question I have, who is to win? And the answer I have,
It is Ukraine to win and the free world to win. And we have everything to make this. Otherwise, dictators will grab this world.
Absolutely right. I do thank you very much for your remarks. And now I invite Judy Dempsey to share with us your opinion. I will tell our audience that Judy is a non-resident senior fellow at the famous Carnegie Europe and editor-in-chief of the Strategic Europe blog. She worked for the International Herald Tribune as a German and East European correspondent and columnist, and Judy was the diplomatic correspondent for the Financial Times for years, covering NATO and European Union enlargement. Judy, so you are a connoisseur in terms of the European, of the EU and NATO enlargement. So what is your impression about NATO Summit in Madrid, about what, I mean, directly,
Okay.
do you think that NATO is back, that NATO is ready to deter Russia? You're welcome.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
fine.
And hello, everybody. I'm not going to say hello to everybody individually because it wastes time. And thank you, Arkady, for this introduction. And actually, I don't agree with you, actually, at all, in many ways. We have to be very clear on what NATO is doing. First of all, NATO has a lot of very nice language, and this 300,000 troops won't materialize because the member states won't actually supply these. This is the first thing. Secondly, NATO says it'll train Ukrainian forces. I hope they do, but it'll be on an individual basis. But as an organization, NATO will not go into Ukraine. This is the first thing. Secondly, I actually, from a political point of view, I actually worry what NATO is doing. They have certainly come back to the Cold War area. It's no longer out of area in Afghanistan or training in Iraq or messing up what it did in Libya, and they did a very bad job in Libya, by the way. And by the way, after so many years, NATO is still in Kosovo. And if it cannot deal with Kosovo in our own European back garden, my heavens, how is it going to deal with Ukraine? But just let me get to the point that I do worry that with all the kind of language that NATO is using, sort of consolidating its eastern flanks, its southern flanks, making Europe more secure. This is great news. And bringing in Finland and Sweden, this is really important because it Europeanizes NATO even more. But what does it do to Eastern Europe? What does it do? Does this create a completely NATO Europe? But what does it do to Moldova? What does it do to Georgia? What does it do to Ukraine? What does it do to Belarus? What does it do to Armenia, Azerbaijan? I mean, I just fear there may be a kind of cordon sanitaire developing here. And we have to be very, very careful of what NATO's strategic goal really is. Of course, its strategic goal is the defense of Europe. But as Arkady said and Christoph Heusgen said, there's a war going on 2 hours from where I live in Ukraine. And NATO is not going to get into a confrontation with Russia on this. And Russia, as we speak, is destroying the complete infrastructure of Ukraine. Houses, schools, hospitals, infrastructure, the extraordinary identity, political, economic, social identity of Ukraine. And this is not going to stop. And we really must have no illusions. The NATO summit doesn't matter to Russia. It's not going to stop the Russia bombing. And if you read very carefully the statements from the Russian Defense Ministry, and I will just call them up here, and what their agenda is for Eastern Ukraine, after Severodonetsk, there will be, excuse my pronunciation, Lysychansk, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, where we see what's happening there. Oh, don't forget Bakhmutu. And by the way, if they get this far, they can go down to Odessa. We are into a very serious not even escalation. The war isn't going to stop. And I sometimes ask myself, with all these statements from the G7 and from NATO and from the European Union, how actually is this war going to stop? This is the first thing. Secondly, and I would like to hear some of the panel discuss this, how do you go back to diplomacy? How do you actually get I have to mention this. It's very important for the Ukrainians to think about this, because they are not going to regain parts of Eastern Ukraine. And you're not going to gain parts of Crimea. We can't have illusions on this. If you're going to have, if you want to end this war, you have to have your basket of goods, your not ideals. This won't matter. What you want from this. The problem is we don't know what Russia wants. I think Arkady is right that Russia does want the destruction of Ukraine. And if it wants the destruction of Ukraine, the Europeans might as well just pack their bags and go home, because if Ukraine is destroyed, the European security architecture is completely destroyed as well. So we need a completely new mindset on how we are going to stop this war. And the very interesting element of all these discussions on the G7 and everywhere else, there's very little analysis on how do you stop the war. Weapons alone will not stop the war. We need something bigger, something deeper, something really important that will convince, if it's at all possible, Putin to actually end this war. The sanctions are kicking in, but they will take a very long time. In the meantime, there's going to be extraordinary destruction, and the Europeans and NATO are actually not stopping this destruction. And I will leave it at that.
Well, thank you, Judy, because I'm going to be a host, because I see that we do have some technical problems with Danylo. So your take is that we need to have a comprehensive approach that is to comprise both military and political issues. Am I right, or am I wrong?
Yes.
What do you mean under diplomatic solution?
We can't go into diplomacy if we don't have a very strong agenda on how we're going to support Ukraine. And we have to support Ukraine. I actually think militarily we have to support Ukraine much more. But actually, Arkady, I think we should have put in a no-fly zone much earlier. And some say, oh, you can't do this because the United Nations and China would stop it and Russia would start it. Well, we've had no-fly zones before without the UN, but we're getting into a bigger problem of the paralysis of the UN, frankly, in stopping these conflicts. But the problem is that if the Europeans don't have some concrete plan, a military one combined with a diplomatic one on how we're going to end this conflict, not only with the suffering increase in the food security and the energy security, but actually Putin will continue with this and destroy your country. And the real danger is that if Russia can do this, then what happens? What happens to the rest of this region? And we cannot rely and depend on the Ukrainian courage and soldiers to do this. They need much more help. Everything around is being destroyed. I'm sorry I get emotional about this. I've covered these wars and Yugoslav wars and the wars in the Middle East, and now Ukraine. But Russia, and if you look at the propaganda, the ideology and the mindset and the whole manipulation, Russia is not going to walk away from this, Arkady, anyway soon. And my feeling is they really don't care about what happens at the G7 summit or the NATO
Judy,
summit.
I do thank you.
You're back.
Thank you, Judy, for your remarks. And I'm again back with you. We have experienced some electricity problems here in Kyiv. So this is because of some kind of emergency that is in my neighborhood. So, but I'm back again, and I thank Arseniy for taking the lead and for this conversation with Judy. I do appreciate. Thank you very much for your very passionate and important point of view. As I understand, you do not undermine what the summit adopted after the deliberations. But of course, this is the question which is being asked by all Ukrainians. How can we indeed stop Putin? How can we win this war? And without huge NATO support, it doesn't look possible. And this point is very clear. Thank you, Judy, for being with us. And now I turn to Ambassador Herbst. John, do you hear me? In your article that you co-authored with Alina Polyakova and published in April 2022, you wrote that, I quote, Ukraine can in fact win a clear military victory. And against all odds, the Ukrainian military has proved capable of doing more than holding the line. It has proved capable of forcing Russian forces to retreat. And this is true. This is indeed, it is. How do you assess for today's summit, and how do you assess the steps that NATO that NATO promises to take to support to further support Ukraine? Do you think this will lead us to that needed victory? You're welcome.
Okay. Ukraine has the chance to take back much, if not all, of the territory seized by Moscow after February 24, if it receives, I would say, the full support of the United States and NATO, which it has not received. For that to happen, for Ukraine to, again, turn back Russian forces in Donbass and in the south, it would require receipt of pretty much all the weapon system that it has correctly been asking for since before this Russian major offensive began. You have received a lot of support from the US and from NATO, but not this. The days leading up to the NATO summit, you had important meetings on weapons supply. And as a consequence of those meetings, you've had an improvement in armaments coming in from the West, starting with the HIMARS, the longer range artillery that the US and others are sending, which have a range of up to 85 kilometers. These intermediate range and higher range you are now adequately supplied with Harpoons and other anti-ship missiles. So these are all important steps. But you are not getting the truly long-range artillery. The United States should have sent artillery with a range of at least 150, or better yet, 300 kilometers. We are still not helping you get the MiGs that some of our Eastern European allies have. Well, there is some fuzziness there, which may be a good thing. We should be preparing, because this is going to be a long fight, for you to receive eventually not just those MiGs, the MiGs now, but F-16s or F-15s later. And there's no such decision yet. If we were to take that decision today and begin the process to deliver these weapon systems, I don't have any doubt that you'd be able to take the offensive in the current battle. I am confident that we will provide tomorrow some of the systems we are refusing to provide today, but I don't know when tomorrow is going to be, and I don't know if we'll provide all of the systems that we're discussing. Now, so the NATO summit was good because it kind of endorsed some of those things that I just described. It was good because it laid out the strategic framework for dealing with Russia. They are saying now what people like me were saying a decade ago, that the main danger, the immediate danger to the West and to the United States is Putin's Russia. China is a longer-term danger because they have a real economy, which Russia does not. But Putin, given his military capacity, although it's much less than we thought, as you've proved, given his military capacity and is willing to take risk, is the more immediate danger. That's very important. Russia's geopolitical position has weakened yet further as a result of the NATO summit, with the taking in of Finland and Sweden. And before the NATO summit, the surprise that Macron and Scholz and Draghi brought to Kyiv a few weeks ago regarding candidate status in the EU, also very important, weakening Moscow's position. Now, Judy is right that none of this means that you're going to do better in the battle on the, right now in Ukraine, right now. But in the long run, this is a very important signal of growing Western support. And now let me offer you what I call a adequate Ukrainian victory, although not a great Ukrainian victory. And I'm confident that this adequate victory is in your future at a minimum. Ukraine, even if we don't do everything I want the West to do, to give you all those weapon systems so you can take back all the February 24 land and maybe even something that the Russians picked up before that, you will be able to have a stable territorial core, which includes Odessa and that part of the Black Sea coast. You will have sufficient weapons support from the United States and NATO to make it hard. You're going to be getting more weapons from us to make the cost of additional Russian aggression much higher. And you will have sanctions in place as a huge weight, not just on the Russian economy and the Russian military. And I believe that that is a sustainable Ukraine, not a wonderful Ukraine. I mean, in a sense, part of your people will be under Putin's dreadful or the Russian dreadful regime. That's terrible. But since the West now understands that Putin is actually a danger, that means they have an interest in making sure that at least this remains of Ukraine. And this is sustainable between what they are willing to do today and the foreseeable future and what you are able to manage. And that for sure is a huge defeat for Putin and may well lead to his departure from the scene. Last point, which could lead to something better than what I've just described. We don't know how long Russia can sustain this war. We do know that our export restrictions on high tech is having a serious impact on Russia's ability to produce advanced weapons. We do know that indiscriminate bombing by the Russians is not just because they're barbarians trying to break the will of the Ukrainian people, but because they don't have so much precision stuff left. And all of this is a factor. They, I suspect, will become exhausted before Ukraine becomes exhausted. Coming back to Arseny's point, that you have a vast superiority in guts and determination.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much for this honest answer and for this picture. I share your optimism. I share your criticism of those who remain reluctant to provide Ukraine with all necessary weapons, but what is important that the West stands with Ukraine, and G7 underlined that they are going to stand with Ukraine as long as it takes. And now I turn to Melinda. Melinda, what is your impression? And you know, they promised that the doors of the alliance remain open for Ukraine. What's that mean? What do you think? Is it the never-ending story of some open doors, or maybe someday it will happen and Ukraine will inevitably join the alliance? You're welcome.
Thank you, Danylo. It's great to be here. Thank you, Arseniy, for having us, and great to share the stage with John and Judy. So I think this was a great week for Ukraine. It's been a great month politically with the EU decision. We saw great unity at the G7, and we're waiting to see if they can pull together a deal on a price cap on oil. And if that happens, that's a really big sign. There's questions, you know, the economists will debate whether it works, but you know, as a symbol, it's really important. We saw NATO expansion today, and I think we're saying a few more things on that as well. So Turkey pulled its objection to new NATO members. Finland and Sweden are officially invited to join, and this is a really big deal. It's a big deal because it signals that Turkey is choosing the West over Russia. I think that got lost in our discussion. It obviously increases the capacity of NATO. Both Finland and Sweden have a lot to offer the alliance. And I think it's a nice contrast. We saw great images coming out of NATO today. What's Vladimir Putin doing today? Does anyone know? He's in Turkmenistan trying to rally Caspian Sea countries. It's pathetic, right? As Mr. Yatsenyuk just said, the alliance is growing and Vladimir Putin is trying to gin up a new alliance on the Caspian Sea. So yeah, it was a really good day. I think Judy is right, though. I think she asked the fundamental question, how do we stop the bombing? It's great that we're expanding the rapid response force from 40,000 to 300,000. It's great that Poland is finally going to have a U.S. presence on the ground, a permanent presence on the ground. But is it going to change anything? That's where I land as well. And Arseniy said it really well. The military situation is grim. The Ukrainians are outmanned and outgunned. There's one other thing that hasn't come up that's worth saying. Resupply is also an issue. Andrew Mircea has written over and over again. He says most of Europe's defense industry has only limited capacity to ramp up quickly. So President Zelensky, the leaders of the G7, the leaders of NATO have all said that this is going to be a long, hard slog. If that's true, we've got to change our economies because we have to have Ukraine's back with supplies. We need to do this now. This is just as important as sending heavy weapons. I also really appreciated President Zelensky's realism today. He said next year could be worse. He's getting people ready. You see, Zelensky has grown up. He's become a statesman. He says, he warned, it may not stop. The conflict may not stop in Ukraine. It could end up in a NATO country next year. And I think the world is waking up to that reality. Thanks for having me. Back to you, Danylo.
Thank you, Melinda. Thank you all. I think that was a great conversation, great talk. The Kyiv Security Forum is grateful to the NATO headquarters for providing the opportunity of having NATO Deputy Secretary General with us today in his pre-recorded message. I thank you all for your honest remarks, for your realistic remarks, but also for your strong, emotional, passionate support of Ukraine. This is very important for us. Pedro Sanchez, the Prime Minister of Spain, as I mentioned today, said very clearly that we are sending a strong message to Putin, you will not win. And this is the message that we repeat tonight. Putin, you will not win. Ukraine will defeat you. I do thank you, and let's stay in touch.
We the army.
Mm.